We're on.
Hi, my name is Diane Sims, and I'm a former deaconess of the World Mission Society Church of God. Me and my husband, Jeff Sims, were pronounced deacons in April of 2006. But we first came to the church back in January 4th, 2003. I will never forget that day because we lived a couple of houses away from the church in Sunland, California. And two guys had been walking by our house with a dog that was lost, and they asked my husband if we knew whose dog this was. One thing led to another, and we ended up going over to the church, and we were baptized immediately, and it was baptized in Korean, and the only thing that I heard in English was in the name of the Father, Jehovah, in the name of the Son, Jesus Christ, and in the name of the Holy Spirit, Unsung Hong. And I cried like a baby because I was very confused and I didn't realize what was happening. But I knew that what they had showed me about baptism and Passover and the Sabbath day seemed pretty legit since it all came to the Bible. And it answered a lot of questions I had had because I had just spent 5 years in the Pentecostal church. So after we were baptized, we proceeded to go to the church every single evening to study for 1 month. And we did from 8 to 11. My husband and I studied that Bible like a sponge. We couldn't get enough. It was so exciting. And it was answering all the questions we had. And everything that they wanted to show us was right from the Bible. They had no notes. They had nothing. So, of course, it was so intriguing. And it was so great. By the end of the month, that's when Pastor Daniel Park, at that time, came to us and said, you know, I just got off the phone with Heavenly Mother. And she is personally inviting you to participate in your first Passover in South Korea with her because she eagerly desires to have the Passover with you.
What year was this, by the way?
This was in 2003. We were baptized in January 4th, and by March we were on our way to South Korea with just 7 of us at the time. And it was very, very exciting. They treated us like kings and queens, and you know, and it was so intriguing because there I am sitting next to, you know, Mother, and it was prayer time, and I'm like, oh God, how do I pray when you're sitting next to me? And actually, here is a picture of us when we went there for the first time. This is me here, and this is my husband, Jeff Sims, who is also known as Deacon Jeff Sims, and I'm Deaconess Diane. So it was wonderful. When we came back, we spent a lot of time at the church. And it was like a small family because at that time there were only 30 or 40 members. And it was really fun. And since we lived so close, we enjoyed it. And I became somewhat like a secretary to Pastor Daniel Park because he was new into America and I was helping them. And I also had my real estate license at the time, so I was helping them look for more churches and things. So a few years later, we had outgrown Sunland, and that's when we moved to Reseda, California. And we grew immensely from that time on. And but I have to be honest with you, there were a lot of questions, and people that know me know that I'm not shy, and I would sit right in the front as Pastor Daniel preached his Bible studies, and I would always be asking all the questions I had and practiced preaching. And at that time he was very particular in what we said and how we said it, how we delivered the message using the same exact words. If we didn't use the same words that he had given us, then we were not able to pass. So that went on, and it went on, and you went through course 1, course 2, and course 3, which I know some of you are very familiar with. So then came November of 2004. We were invited to take a special trip to South Korea again, which was the first time that they had 50 members going there. And this was just for gospel workers to go and learn. And that's what we did. We studied. So as time goes by, we come back and we're out there preaching and delivering the message and bearing fruit. And you know that you have to participate in all the 7 feasts of 3 times a year. And if you didn't, you were not going to the kingdom of heaven, no matter what anybody said. Even if you kept all of the days for the Feast of Tabernacles and you missed that Feast of Day of Atonement, I'm sorry. According to the pastors, you were not going to the kingdom of heaven because you could not get to the next step, according to the Old Testament. Well, as time went on, in 2006, that's when Jeff and I were made deacons and deaconesses, and that's when Pastor Daniel Park was transferred to the Denver, Colorado church. And Pastor John Lee came into Reseda. And that was a very complicated year. The transition was terrible. He was the exact opposite of Pastor Daniel Park, and a lot of members left. A lot of members were discouraged, including myself. I didn't even preach for a whole year because I was very confused on how the system was working. And finally, you know, my goal to go to heaven was the most important thing in the world. If I could do whatever I could to be obedient and follow the rules and the way of Christ and walk in His footsteps, then I knew I could get a position as one of the 144,000, and that's all that I ever wanted to do. And I didn't care who got in my way, and I didn't care who hurt me or rejected me, but there was everything in my power to make sure that I entered into the kingdom of heaven. And I know those that are listening to me right now that have been members or family members, please understand that all of the people that attend the World Mission Society Church of God, their goal is to be obedient. Nothing else but that. They want to be obedient to God. They want to follow in His footsteps. And they want to go to the kingdom of heaven. And they want to be one of the 144,000 because that is the best position you can have for eternity. And I used to tell people that all the time. We work so hard here in America to get the best job in the world. But what about for eternity? You want to work so hard so that you can get to the kingdom of heaven and have the best position next to Father and Mother, right? Isn't that the way it is?
So Diane, would you share what some of the changes were?
Well, when Pastor Daniel Park was there for the first 4 years, he was very like a commander-in-chief. He was always there at the church. His door was always open. He answered a lot of questions. He did share some financial business statements with us and how the church was going with finances. Because before we purchased the Reseda Zion, he had gone around to all of the leaders, and he knew who those were that had money. And he asked us to help donate to put for a down payment upon the church, to buy the church, you know, and how many blessings we would get for that, you know. So, of course, we did. And we put up lots of money. And many of us put up thousands and thousands of dollars so that we could buy that. And even though I was the realtor and I was one of the the buyer's agents for purchasing Reseda, we gave up a bunch of our commission to help purchase that church.
And what was different about
well,
Pastor
after
John?
he left, Pastor John Lee got us all together in a group, and he said, I don't care what Pastor was doing when he was here before, but now I'm the pastor, and I never, ever want to see any of you tell anybody what to do. Ever, ever. If you want to tell somebody what to do, then you must fast and pray for 3 days, and then you can go and tell them what to do, which was totally opposite of what we were taught for 4 years. So we were very confused in what our role was as leaders. And I did have a lot of difficulty. I didn't understand what a deaconess was. You know, they just kept on saying a deaconess is to serve. But I was like, I was already serving. I was taking care of the restrooms. I mean, for the whole 9 years that I was in the church, that was my thing, was taking care of the restrooms, because I believed it resembled, you know, it affected the whole church. And I supplied all the supplies, and between myself and my husband, I can't even emphasize, we must have given over $250,000 because we wanted to be the best gospel workers that there were out there. And we believed that God was allowing us to make this money in our own business and to help support and the church and all the members to make it the nicest place.
So, but also, didn't you bring in a lot of members?
I personally only brought in a few members, and that's why I got really scared towards the end there. As my life goes on in the church, in 2000, 10, I should say, but in the beginning of 2010, my husband started questioning many of the teachings and many of the studies because they started changing. And if you weren't doing the things that they wanted to do, you were kind of left out of the loop and you weren't considered to be a good gospel worker. Because he was working to support me so that I could help inside the church, because I wasn't working. I was just at the church I was there from 10 o'clock in the morning to 10 o'clock at night, probably 5 to 6 days a week.
Wow.
And, I did everything I could. But to bear fruit, I don't know, I just couldn't lead people to come in. But what happened was I was able to teach people because I had gone to course 3, and so I became like a teacher, and where I was one of the elders, in my age, as a deaconess, I was considered to be like maybe the head deaconess or something like that, because there weren't that many. Even as the church grew, there were far and few in between.
How about your husband? Was he fruitful in terms of?
No, he was not. And he did try really hard, but he didn't bear a lot of fruit. And by 2011, he had really only started attending one service on Saturdays and maybe Tuesday evening.
So wasn't there a teaching, correct me if I'm wrong, that unless you recruit 10 people, you couldn't be in the...
Exactly, and that began in 2010, I think, 2009.
So if you didn't have the spiritual brownie points, then you were toast, no matter how many years you worked or how much money you gave.
You had to bear 10 talents. If you didn't bear 10 talents, then you could not become a disciple, and you could not go to the kingdom of heaven.
Yeah, it somehow doesn't seem fair, does it?
No, it doesn't.
May I ask you a few questions?
Sure, please.
So,
I could talk all day.
What was your experience with relationships, marriages, family? Did it improve in your involvement with the World Mission Society Church of God, or did your relationship with your family get harder and more distant?
Well, the first 4 years it was pretty good with my husband, but not with my oldest son. My oldest son was totally against us coming to the church in the first place because he had just graduated from Bethany College to become a youth pastor. So he was a devout, born-again Christian, and he believed everything we were learning was coming directly from Satan. Because I had been searching and looking for questions so long that he said, Satan finally answered your questions for you. So, no, and then, everything, going to family holidays was not the same. I did it for like 1 year, the first year actually, but there's not a lot to talk about. They're smoking, they're drinking, you don't want to be around that. You have really nothing in common with your family anymore. So, you're the person that cuts yourself off from the family because you don't have anything in common. There's nothing to talk about.
Did you try to recruit them, though?
Of course. I told every single one of them about Father Christ Unsung Home and Heavenly Mother Jerusalem. They thought that I was out of my mind. They thought I was on drugs. They think that I'm being, right away they would give me accusations that I was in a cult. And I said, no, I'm not. I'm not in this is not a cult. Everything I'm learning is coming from the Bible. But I missed, because my favorite niece in the whole world from New Hampshire got married on the day of the Feast of Tabernacles. I missed her wedding. I missed so many weddings because, the Italians get married on Saturday.
Right.
And you cannot miss...
Forgive me for laughing.
You cannot miss a Sabbath day. I almost missed my own son's wedding because he was getting married on a Saturday. It's my Sabbath day. And even though I went to Indiana to see his wedding on a Sabbath day, everything possible that went wrong went wrong. And I thought it was because I wasn't in a Zion and I was trying to keep service on my own.
Wow. So tell me about how you seemed so passionate, you were so into it, 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week is a lot of time.
Yes, it is.
What caused you to decide to leave?
Well, we got transferred up to, with a lot of work. We got transferred up to Denver, Colorado, so that we could be under Pastor Daniel Park again, because We had history with him, and we really liked the way that he held the church. Plus, they bought a new church up there. We wanted to be part of building it and growing it, and start all over again, you know, because my son and my husband were having some problems with Pastor John Lee. So we left in May of 2011. And when we got up there, a lot of bad things happened with my son, and they started the discipleship program with 10 talents. And that's when we had seen members get gold coins from Heavenly Mother for bearing so many talents. And a talent consists of, if you don't know, bringing a soul into the church. And they had to keep at least 4 services in a month. And by the 4th service, they had to start tithing and preaching. So if they didn't do that, they weren't considered a talent. And actually, they would have meetings and put on the overhead projector the list of people's names and who was their messenger and if they were tithing. They really got into it. And then they started doing the new discipleship program with a new way of teaching now with the, you know, the first thing that comes off my head is, I can't even remember now. I just lost it. It will come back to me. But many of the studies did change, like King David changed. The City of Refuge in Mother, that was deep, and that changed. There were so many things that had changed. The Savior of each age was one of the biggest ones that changed. And if you didn't preach it properly, you didn't preach it the right way, then you weren't even getting into the discipleship program. You had to do all your signatures all over again. Well, nevertheless, I started to feel like no matter what I did in the church, I wasn't going to get to heaven because I couldn't bear fruit. And I preached. And really, God is my witness, and you can ask the members. I was there from 10 to 1. I was there in the evening preachings. I was there in the afternoon preachings, all day Sunday. I was there. And I would come home and I would cry. I would try to call up one of the sisters from LA, but I was rebuked many, many times for talking to the sisters in LA because I'm not part of LA, I'm part of Denver now.
Right.
But then December came of 2011 and I got a text from a sister worried because Missionary Ron had missed 3 services. Now, Missionary Ron was Deacon Ron when I met him back in 2003, and he was our mentor, he was our teacher, he was my gumbare. He's Italian, you know, we hit it off really good. His sister was very helpful to me. You know, we looked up to him because he knew the Bible, and he would say to us too, if this isn't the truth, I'll be the first one to tell you. But I can promise you from what the Bible is showing me, this is the truth. So nevertheless, he hadn't been coming for 3 weeks. I tried to call him on the phone. He didn't answer my phone call. Finally, a week later, he called me and he said, Diane, I got something to tell you. And I said, oh boy, this doesn't sound good. He said, well, can you, where are you? And I said, I'm at home. He said, are you by your computer? And I said, yes. And he said, well, sit down in front of your computer and go to Google and type in NCPCOG. So I said, okay, this can't hurt. And I even asked him, what is that for? He says, it's a church website. It's all right, don't worry about it. Because, you know, we're frowned on going on the internet. So I went to that and I clicked on it. And I went to the home page. And the very first thing I saw on the home page was the same picture I had in my wallet of Unsung Home. And do you know the first thing I said? What the heck is he doing there? I was amazed because everything that I had questioned my whole 9 years in this church, that I had filed in the back of my head because I thought, who could show us these scriptures? Who could show us these teachings? He had to be God. You know, he had to be God. But everything that I questioned or doubted was filed back here. And when I saw his picture on the internet, they all came rushing forward, just like in a movie. It was like everything flashed before my eyes, and I began to cry, and I was so confused. I was like, what is going on here? He said, well, take your time and read through it. Of course, it's broken English. You know, it's translated a little bit. From what I read, I didn't like it. I didn't like it at all. Because I had seen that book that they had on there concerning Jerusalem, the issue of Jerusalem and the bride or something like this. You know, and the little bit that I caught out of there was not good. Because he was stating that there is no female that is above who is Jerusalem. That Jerusalem is a place and not a person.
Wow.
And the only reason why I believed in God the Mother was because I believed in Unsung Home. He was the one that showed me these scriptures. He was the one that I believed to be the second coming of Christ. So because he said that this lady that's in Korea, Zangjilja, is Heavenly Mother Jerusalem, then that's why I believed in her. Because he showed it through the scriptures. But if he's turning around and saying now, hey, there is no God the Mother, this lady Unsu Lin, proclaimed to be God the Mother or whatever, I'm telling you now that there is no God the Mother. And the way he writes it in the preface, and if you look at this translation that is existing on the examiningthewmscog.com website, you can look very closely on the preface. And he says, women like Unsu Lin who say these things, they are corrupt. And I should have brought it with me because I could have quoted, and I do quote it to many people, because he's using the plural term. That means there are people out there that are going to deceive you and turn the scriptures around. And what is in store for them? And he quotes Isaiah saying they will what? Suffer the consequences in hell. So
he wrote this years before he died, obviously.
He wrote it in 1984. 1 year before he died.
Oh, interesting.
Now they, of course, the WMSCOG, proclaimed, after we all left because of this book, had a great big story with a video of cartoons. I never saw it. I've heard a lot about it. We call it damage control, saying, that was meant for that time. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 1. There is a time and a season for every activity under heaven. Well, they're saying that book was only written for that time and that season. But I beg your pardon. If Unsung Home is so poor, if Unsung Home is not in a rich statement where there's no funds available, why would he take the time and the money to publish that book? Because that takes time and that takes money. And he published all these other books because he wanted them to be seen and read by people coming after him.
Right.
And a dead man can't talk. So we don't know. But I know if I believe the words that he wrote in the mystery of God in the spring of water of life, which we call the Green Book, and I believe those words, nobody's ever explained that book to me. We just take it for what it's worth, reading the scriptures that he gives. Then in the same way, when you read that book, and that nobody has in English for some strange reason, then you will see. You have to take his words for what he says. And nobody needs to explain it to you. But Pastor Daniel Park insisted on explaining that book to me. So, we had a meeting. I left the church on December 17th, 2011. One day I was there full time, ready to go. The next day, there was no way I could go. It was a third day. I was assigned to do closing prayer. There was no way I could have gone back to the church. And maybe 10 minutes after service, they're calling. Pastor's calling, looking for me. And I told him I was sick, because I was sick to my stomach. I was sick for 4 days. It was terrible. Gagging and vomiting, because my whole faith, my love in the scriptures, my God, my goal to go to the kingdom of heaven was stolen from me. And I don't know if I'll ever get it back. And that's their fault. Because they pretended to know the second coming of Christ. And they don't know him. They don't know nothing about the love of God. Because, like I told them, I was invited to a meeting in Denver, Colorado. My husband and my son of 18 at the time, we went, and there were 15 deacons and deaconesses there, sat around the round table from Wyoming, Kansas City, Colorado Springs. They all came to watch the sideshow. And I called it the Inquisition, where I sat at the round table on the hot seat as they tried to explain this book to me. But I was no fool. because every question I had, which I had documented because I'm a very organized person, I knew exactly how he was going to answer them because I have been trained to debate and reason with the scriptures like Apostle Paul. And so in my own mind, every doubt I had, every question I had, I could answer with this side of my brain because I was already programmed to do it. No matter what question you asked me, no matter what doubt you had, I could find that answer for you in the scriptures.
Or at least
because
in terms
that's
of the
how
World
they
Mission Society
Yes.
point of view, scriptures as opposed to the Orthodox Christian scriptures. So in other words, they had this inquisition, but it didn't work because you already knew what they were going to say and how they were going to argue.
And I left that meeting telling them that, I don't know, when you come into the church, you study, right? In order to believe that he's second coming Christ, you study diligently. There's a word of the WMS, diligently. So that you can believe he is the second coming Christ. Well, I urge every one of you, you need to study and you need to research the true facts of who An Sang Hong is as a person, as a human being that walked on this earth. And in my mind, he was a great biblical scholar who had taken many teachings from many other churches and combined them together to come up with the best interpretations he could possibly have. And I respect him as a person for that. But after he died and left, those people that formed this organization, I don't know what they were doing.
Well, I beg to differ with you, if I may, Diane.
Okay.
Because it seems to be a documented fact that An Sang Hong was a member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
That's true.
For 16 years, is it?
Well, I don't know. I don't know that it's
14 or so. I think it's 16 years. And it's interesting because I found a document, a video on YouTube this week. And I remember the URL of the person who did it was spirituallysmart.org.com. And it's an expose on Ellen White and the Seventh-day Adventist Church, going back to the 1800s, and all of her false prophecies and all of her errors in biblical teachings. And it just was so obvious as I was watching that for him to be a member for 14 to 16 years, it's clear that he was not a biblical scholar, because this organization is not following Orthodox Christianity, from my understanding of Orthodox Christianity.
First of all, I don't have any facts yet that he was even a member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Oh.
I don't have any facts that he was even baptized there. Because all the information that I have, I should say, regarding him being a member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church is coming from the World Mission Society Church of God websites, which are several of them.
So the actual group's own website said he was a member?
Yes.
I see.
The only website I saw that information on, Steve, was called the Church of God Jesus Witnesses. Where it has a timeline of his life.
So I think that what's really interesting to me now, Diane, is that because of the internet, because of media, we can now make connections with Korea, and for people who are former members, people who have actual documents in Korean that we can certifiably translate. There's a professor, a Christian professor named G.Il Tark, who I met, who actually gave a talk a couple of years ago about the World Mission Society Church of God, and I've been in touch with him. And so documents are coming back and forth. And for sure, if something's legitimate, I always say it will stand up to scrutiny.
Exactly.
So, you know, kind of seek and you will find.
Exactly.
If you need to know this kind of information. But based on what I've been hearing you say, you've had your own first-hand experience, you and your husband, as well as the person who brought you into this group, Ron Ramos, has left. And it seems from our other conversation like you were advising people not to remain in this group.
No.
At all.
Not at all.
Why not?
Because Ansang Hong himself said there is no God the Mother.
Mm-hmm.
And I even took those scriptures and I brought them to strangers in a Korean restaurant and in a Korean like vitamin store. And one was a young person, one was an older person. And I asked them to translate these scriptures. And they both said the same thing. Those that believe that Jerusalem is a female is crazy or out of their mind or delusional, the same thing.
Very
and she said it was all written in Old Korean.
Very interesting. Before, Diane, if I can switch
Sure.
direction for a moment, you had talked about going to the pastor's wife and then the pastor asking about the issue of abortions. Would you
Yes.
share what you
Yes.
told me about your experience?
As the adult deaconess in the church, a lot of, when Pastor John Lee wasn't there, everybody was recommended to come to me for questions because missionary was head of the men,
Right.
adults. I was head of the women adults. And so they would come to me with various questions, and a lot of them would ask me about abortions or having a baby. You know, and even me, I'll confess, I thought, especially if you were a good gospel worker, you know, and you were out preaching with me all the time, and you came to me and said you were pregnant, I even told when she's a deaconess also, you know, I said, what are you, crazy? Why are you going to have a child? You know, that's going to interfere with the gospel work. Why are you going to bring a kid into this world when we're going home? You know, it's nothing but a deterrence. And then what? And then you're going to be worrying about that child's safety all the time. You know? And
So where'd you get that idea from? Was it something that you had heard inside the church?
No, it's just because in order to be one of the 144,000, it is common sense that you need to bear fruit. You need to lead souls into the kingdom of heaven, as many as you can, no matter what it takes. And as time went on, it became like a contest. It really did. I felt like it was a contest. Sometimes I didn't even go preaching because it was like, why am I preaching? Am I really wanting to save souls, or am I doing it to get brownie points in heaven?
Right. That's the whole faith by works versus faith. I mean, salvation by works as opposed to salvation.
And the young
by faith.
people in their early 20s that are married, and I know of one couple that they wanted to be sent out. Everybody wants to be sent out and start a house church. And when she became pregnant, she was very concerned about that. How is she going to be sent out if she has a baby? And ultimately, they made the decision to have an abortion. But when I went to the pastor's wife, Deaconess Judy, and I asked her, what does the church say about abortions? She looked at me and she said, well, isn't that a Catholic thing? You know, isn't that with the Catholic religion about not having abortions? You know, I don't see any problem with it, really. And I said, oh, okay. So then I went to Pastor John, and he said, well, I don't know, let me ask the assembly. So we waited and we waited and we waited. And I would go to him on a weekly basis. Have you heard anything from the assembly? Many, many sisters are wondering about this. This is a big thing in the church right now. And he said, well, I don't know. He said, let them make up their own mind. Whatever they want to do, let them do it. The church has no say on it.
That's interesting. So on the one hand, there's a message that the end is coming any second, and you need to spend all your time recruiting new people, bearing fruit. On the other hand, he's saying let people make up their own minds.
Yeah, because he didn't want to be accountable for saying, yes, go ahead. So it's up to you. Just like they say about divorce, it's up to you. But that's not true.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Ron and I were talking, and I was a leader in the Moonies, the Unification Church, and we both felt like the Koreans were using the Americans to do the dirty work, but so that they wouldn't be held accountable, and so they could, say we didn't order anything, but in fact we were getting very clear messages of the way things should be. And so there's a lot of interesting parallels with the Moonies. Another parallel that we talked about was the Shem, Ham, and Japheth teaching, and how in the Unification Church, Moon talked about how black people are the descendants of Ham, and how they're not as gifted and not as spiritual as Caucasians and especially Koreans, who are kind of the master race. Do you have any experience with any teachings that talk about blacks and Latinos?
Well,
people of
yeah,
color?
I was in that service when Ron heard that.
Oh,
So
tell me what you heard.
it was the same thing that he said. I mean, it was a sermon that was given on a Sabbath day regarding this. And I'll be honest with you, it was so long ago. It was way back in 2003. 2003, 2004, and up to 2005, we had the deepest Bible studies, which they stopped doing when Pastor John Lee came in, because those prophecies were already done and over with, and we don't have to be concerned with that anymore. And every time I tried to bring up the prophecy of that, or some of the other studies that they had, they said, we don't need to know that right now, And even towards the very end, when I was in Denver, I would ask a question, because somebody brought me the question regarding in the book of Luke, about John the Baptist, and I asked a little bit of question to the missionary at that time. And, because we're just sitting there talking like you and I brought it up, and he looked at me and he said, why are you going there with that? Why are you bringing that up? Don't you have faith in Father and Mother? Don't you trust Father and Mother? That's the guilt that every single member will lay on one another. If you question or doubt anything, it always comes back to, where is your faith?
Yeah. So, I mean, in my experience working with people from many, many different groups, a lot of religious, destructive groups, the emphasis really is on blind obedience.
It is.
It's not thinking, it's not free will, it's
No.
really just trusting that the authority is speaking for God, and using a lot of fear and phobias to make people feel like their salvation is going to be lost if they don't obey blindly.
I just thought of something when you were saying that too, because I was studying with this one girl repeatedly because she wasn't coming, and she said that she was, having a hard time understanding the book of Romans in her church, and then Pastor John looked at her and he said, yeah, but we don't have to think anymore. We just have to do. And I looked at him, and at the time I thought, oh, that's pretty true. We don't really have to think. We just do what God tells us to do.
Yeah, and I had many moments where Moon would say things like, people say that, well, we're brainwashing people, but wouldn't you agree that Americans have dirty minds and they need heavenly brainwashing? And we'd be like, yes, Father, we need heavenly brainwashing, Father.
And that's how it is in the WMSCOG.
So
it's because
sad.
you always want to have your mind on the heavenly things.
Yes.
You never want to have your mind on the worldly things. As much as possible, never ever have your mind on the worldly things, participating in the worldly ways, the secular music, even some of the movies. I mean, it's just, even having like a barbecue with some of the members.
Right.
Outside of the church at your house. At first, in the beginning, when we first came, it was great. Like I said, we were such a small group of people. I mean, even Pastor Daniel would come over my house and have a pool party.
Right.
And we'd cook, Korean barbecue and watermelon and everything. But after, and no, nobody. And when Pastor John came in and said that, we were all looking like we're friends, we're family. We are all we have, because all of us, I'd have to say 99.9% of us that were dedicated gospel workers did not have physical family any longer.
Well, because the physical family was still there, they just had cut off from them.
We cut ourselves off from them because we didn't want to participate in the worldly ways.
Because you were told that it's evil.
Exactly.
They're all, Satan
Exactly.
and evil. That's how the Moonies think, too. Very
Exactly.
black and white, us versus them.
Even about marriage, even about having children. Everything. Why are you going to have children? And if your spouse is not participating in the gospel work and giving you slack, the Bible clearly states in 1 Corinthians chapter 7 that, you need to stay with him. unless he's unfaithful. But at the end there, they were encouraging people to leave them. And I'll find you a better husband.
Yeah,
I'll find you a better wife.
And did you ever hear of Americans being asked to marry Koreans?
Of course. They were set up. Well, I know, and I felt so bad for this one girl in Denver. She wanted to be, run a house church. She wanted to be sent out so bad. But in order to do it, she had to be married. You couldn't do it, women could not do it without being married. So, you could go to the pastor and say, I am requesting to meet this person, because you can't just date anybody in the church. You have to go to the pastor, you have to ask permission, and then he will arrange it if he deems it good. If you are the same character, as he puts it.
Right.
And they hooked her up with a younger Korean that actually, I know the story that he was lying to his family in Korea. He's supposed to be in college, but there he is living on the church premises. And he married this girl, and she, I know personal things about their first night as being married, and that's not just the first time. There are so many. Another one here in Southern California, he was set up. He just barely got divorced from his first wife, and he was set up with a Korean lady,
So
and they couldn't even communicate.
To divorce his first wife?
No, that was before he came into the church,
I
from
see.
what I know.
I see.
But anyways, she don't speak English, and he was so sad.
So do you think it had to do with getting them green
Of
cards for
course.
the U.S.? Why
I
do you
don't have to
think
think that, because they only had, many of them were out there either on a student visa or a visiting visa, and in order to be able to stay, you had to be married and get sponsored. Now that part of it, I don't know how that all worked with them.
Yeah, I can just say in my former cult group, there was a lot of marriages to basically individuals from Korea, Japan, other places, just to bring them into the United States. And in the Moonies, they were often not allowed to even have sex for 4 years.
Wow.
Supposedly so people could grow vertically before they start to have a family. But for many of us leaders, it was clear they wanted people to work hard for the group, put the focus on that, and not to have it diverted to families. Can you talk a little bit about information? Were you encouraged to talk with other members outside of church about what you thought of the sermons, or what contradictions or questions you had, or were you discouraged, would you say?
No, we could have Bible studies and
right, but let's say you had a bad experience somewhere.
Well, yeah, you always
discouraged?
have one sister that you can find into, or one or two, of course, that you can vent on, that you could cry on, and a lot of them were afraid. I'd have to say, again, 99% of the people in the Reseda Zion Church are afraid of Pastor John. They don't feel comfortable talking to him. He shows a lot of favoritism. And after I left the church in February, Zhang Jiljia, God the Mother, called me, and I told her straight out that she has evil pastors. Pastor John Lee is a pathological liar.
That they have evil
pastors?
Pastors?
I told her right out. Pastor John Lee is a pathological liar and a wicked, selfish man. He's going to burn in hell. And you know what she said to me in clear English?
What?
A lot of the pastors are like that. Don't listen to the Koreans. They're evil.
What?
They don't know what they're saying.
She said
I
that?
recorded that conversation.
Wow.
So I know, and I'm not making it up. And she told me,
I'd love
please,
to hear
please, I love you, Diane, I miss you. Please come back, have the Passover. We go home to heaven together.
Wow.
Please, this last Passover, please come.
Wow.
She said last year, she even told Ron, last year was going to be the last Passover. And even in 2011 Passover, when we were preparing the Passover in the kitchen with the grapes and everything, Pastor Daniel Park came in and said he got off the phone with Mother, and this is a very special Passover because this will probably be the last Passover. So, and I was very upset because they were not doing the grape thing like I was taught. So every church is different.
Yeah, but it's really interesting because now they're saying they never said 2012. It was the end. And talk about, were you encouraged to bring into the church people with who are handicapped, or people with alcoholism problems, or
Never.
anything like that? Talk a little bit about your experience.
No, we weren't encouraged to preach to homeless people at all, or to help them. And even, I tell you, one sister did bring in a homeless girl, and she was coming, and then the pastor went to her and told her, don't bring her here anymore. We don't associate with them, because they're thinking of us like the regular churches, the general churches, and the general Christians, and they're looking for food and things like that, and we're not here to supply them with that.
Was that Pastor John who said
Yes.
that to you? That's
Yes.
interesting. What year did he say that to you?
This had to be like in 2008.
Uh-huh.
Somewhere around there, and she was very, very heartbroken. I don't think she ever really got over that, you know. And also with the handicapped, because, and I know, for example, I was preaching out here. I was in Southern California, and I was preaching one of the youth brothers, and we were talking to somebody in the wheelchair, and he asked me how, you know, should we preach to him? And so I was afraid to call the pastor and ask him. And I tried to call missionary Ron. He wasn't available. So I called another missionary, because I was headed up to Denver anyways. And I asked him, and he goes, you know, you can preach to them, you can deliver them to the church, but they're going to be your responsibility and your fruit. That means you have to make sure that you're picking them up and taking them to the church, and you're doing this, and you're taking care of them, which is a lot of work. Do you have really time to spend on somebody that's handicapped than somebody that's willing and able to be the best gospel worker there is, who's going to bear fruit for you? Is somebody that's handicapped going to be able to bear fruit? No. They're not going to be able to go out preaching or anything like this. So really, they don't come right out and tell you this, but, you know, it's under your own discernment.
Yeah, what do you think of that now? What do you think about that?
Even at the time, those were one of those things that I filed in the back of my head.
Isn't that terrible? So discriminatory.
It is. It is.
It just minimizes the spiritual nature of people. You know, we could talk for hours. We've been talking for over 45 minutes.
Uh-oh, that's too long.
And I guess, you know, some people may have been tired already, but my guess is some people are still listening to this video. I guess I want to ask you to take a moment and just think, if is there anything else you'd like to share on this particular video of someone who may be thinking of joining the Missionary Church of God, or people who are in it who are thinking of whether or not they should stay in it, or people who've left already that may be feeling guilty and confused.
Well,
anything you'd like to share?
That's how we're held there, by fear and guilt. It has a lot of power. But I want to tell you that God is a God of love. God never lies. The very first thing that God hates is a lying tongue. And one lie is one lie too many. There is no such thing as a righteous lie. The churches, God is above the law, but his workers are not above the law. We should obey the laws of earth as we obey the laws of heaven. As it is on earth, it is in heaven. So whenever you see something happening in the church and you know it's not right, and you know it's not legal, please do something about it. Pray about it. It's not right. Jesus Christ never turned away people, even if they were evil, even if they were wicked. He just left them and said, go away from me. He didn't cause trouble for them. He didn't sue them. And he never ever lied. He's a kind, compassionate person. And when I left the church, and we all left the church, not one person called us. We were cut off. Now really, is that love? Is that what God is all about? Just shutting you off just like that? Not asking if you're okay? Not seeing what's going on? And all those people that know me knew how much I love God. But not one would talk to me. Not one would look at me, and they run from us. They're so afraid of us. Why? Are you afraid of the truth? The truth will set you free. So come out and open your eyes and wake up, because the time is now. And my people perish for lack of knowledge. And we have to know who God is and know that he loves you more than life. And He wants you to be with Him the way that He showed us 2,000 years ago, not the way that the WMSCOG is showing you, by shutting off your family members and turning away from the ones that love you more than anything in this world.
Wow.
So please, go home to your real father and mother who gave you birth on this earth and love them and hold them and tell them, I'm sorry, I made a mistake and I was hypnotized. I really feel like it was a hypnosis thing. And we didn't realize what we were saying or doing because we only wanted to go to heaven. But now that I am here, standing 1 year later, I'll tell you the truth. God does not lie. And please, please, research and study the facts of the history of who this man is. Thank you so much for all of your time. Thank you so much.
I feel like clapping. I can see how you were such a powerful communicator. I really, really thank you for sitting down with me. And I guess I just want to comment that for me, one of the big things in me coming out of the Moonies was realizing that God wasn't a liar also, and therefore anyone who said they were speaking for God who was a liar, you know, couldn't be really following the one true God. And also that when I was in the Moonies, we believed that we had a higher level of love than anyone else because we were with God. But when I left, I realized it was totally conditional love, conditional upon membership, but not real love. Like real love, you love the person even if they're doing stuff you don't like.
Exactly.
You still love their beingness.
Yes.
And yet cult groups, in my experience and in my opinion, it's all about obedience.
Yes.
And it's all about, you know, work and not really spirituality, even if they say that it's about spirituality and salvation. So I want to thank you. Sorry I didn't get to meet your husband Jeff, but I'm hoping he'll make a video too and share some of his own experiences. I'm sorry he didn't come. He got a service call right as we were leaving to come here. And I want to encourage anyone else who's watching this, if you have a story you want to tell, well, these days you can put it up on YouTube, or you can have a friend with a video camera, or an iPhone even these days, or a smartphone. Because I think the more people who come out, the less afraid the members who are in there who want to come out will be. Because they'll see, you know, there's life after involvement with the group. It hurts for a little while, but time heals things. Yeah, thanks again. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.